Okay, peace and blessings, everybody. I'm just gonna go ahead and try to make this as quick as possible. This is too easy, and I really feel sad for Haka. This is just plain old too easy. Let me just go ahead and get right into it. 10 questions that So Real of Shield Squad answers. One, Isaiah 63, talking about who is a person that's basically coming out of Edom. It says, "Who is this that comes from Edom in crimson garments from Basra? He who is splendid in his apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength. It is I, speaking in righteousness, mighty to save." Now, the first thing that you'll notice is that the oracle is most dramatic. Not only the only Old Testament passage in the way that resembles this account is Joshua, right? When he speaks in chapter 5, when he ends up saying, you have Joshua, right? It says, "And when Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with a drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, Are you for us or for our adversaries?" So the way that Isaiah is talking is very similar to his earlier, his earlier ancestor Joshua, right? Who is his figure? You know, Isaiah speaks very poetically, and so it's no surprise that it's kind of similar to this figure here, right? Now, what you'll notice also, basically, the whole notion describes a watchman, right? So Isaiah is describing a watchman observing, a warrior coming from the southeast, the direction of Edom, which is red, and its capital Basra, which represents kind of like vindication and things. So Edom was like the perennial enemy, but here it's quite clear it represents the synecdoche of all Israel's enemies. Why do I say this? Because this is the one thing that perhaps I'm going to do a further presentation on, showing how one nation can be a representative of just a general enemy, right, of Israel. It can represent all enemies of Israel, right? One nation can do that. You'll notice that kind of like poetical consistency throughout the Old Testament and even in the New. So when you have this here, it basically has Edom, right? Has Basra. If the text is right for Edom and its chiefly city of Basra, then they're used as typical of the nations. And basically, there's a reference to Isaiah chapter 34. Now, I didn't want to go ahead and put it in the slide because, it would just be way too much. But definitely check the reference. It uses that in the same way. So basically, you have who it is that appears in such a high or such a habit of posture. You have in Isaiah 63, for like I said, we're reading right now, and it basically says that they cometh from Edom, that is Idumea, the country where Esau, sometimes called Edom, dwelled. And it is here put forth for all enemies of God's church, as it is in Isaiah 34. Once again, that's the second time it is referenced, verses 5 and 6. The prophets, therefore, generally apply the name of this people to signify any inter in inveterate and cruel enemy, as it is in this place. So the words of Edom and Bozrah may be taken in the appellative sense to denote in general what? A field of blood or a place of slaughter. The word Edom signifying red and Bozrah of vintage, which in the prophetical idiom imports God's vengeance upon the wicked. Period. That's it. So when you have this whole notion of with dyed, with red, and stained with garments, right? Thus Christ is described in Revelation 19:13. So this is very similar. Something that writing, and we all know that there are plenty parts in the book of Revelation where Jesus is basically telling him to write things down. So it's no surprise that Isaiah 63 is, a future reference to Revelation 19:13 here. And you'll always kind of notice this. There's always this kind of like national fulfillment, and then after that, there's this later spiritual fulfillment of things. And I get to that later on in my slide. Now, it says in Revelation 19:13, where also he is represented as taking vengeance upon who? Edom? No, his enemies. Just like the idiom ended up saying how God's vengeance was taken upon the wicked. Just like when Edom or Moab or any of these nations can represent multiple nations. Isaiah 34 is just one reference. Now I'm going to get into other references of when the Old Testament prophets and authors actually continue to do this. So this is a reason why Revelation 19:13 confirms this. So Saint John in Revelation has applied this image of the prophet, right, to Jesus. Now another thing, he went to Zechariah chapter 14 verse 21, right? And he wanted to know, well, how can the Edomites or how can the Canaanites be extinct or something like that? And this is, a prophetic passage about the end times and things. Now, what I decided to do, because this was a bit much, I decided to make a separate video about this. What I will do is, before I get into my thing here, I'll definitely give you my cliff notes. When it says that in every pot in Jerusalem and Judah shall be holy to the Lord of hosts, what you have is during those times in the Old Testament, there were actually, bowls for the priests, and yet everything else was just common. So you had the sacred and you had the common. You had the sacred and you had the profane, right? And yet, in the new covenant or in the times to come, that's not going to be the way that things are, where it's like, okay, well, this is for God and the rest of you guys can use this. No. In the age to come, it's going to be, you know what? And every pot in Jerusalem and Judah shall be holy to the Lord of hosts. Everything is going to be holy. Everything is going to belong to God, so that all who sacrifice may come and take of them and boil the meat of the sacrifice in them. Now, here's the thing. You have no, I'm not gonna get into it. I'm not gonna get into it. The cliff notes are in First Corinthians chapter 1, chapter 10, and that's the first 5, 6 verses, and the other one is First Corinthians chapter 5. I won't get into it, but I think that suffices for an answer for right now. After that, you have, and there shall no longer be a traitor in the house of the Lord of hosts on that day. Now, of course, the KJV says Canaanite, but we'll get to that a little later. What I wanted to say is that where it says here, it shall be like there shall be a traitor. Well, there's a reason, because the first century Targum, and I advise you guys to go ahead and look up what the Targums are. The Targums are paraphrases of the entire Old Testament during the first century. Guess what it says? It says, quote, there shall be no more a merchant in the house of the sanctuary of the Lord. Notice it did not say Canaanite, but we'll find that out in a little bit. So therefore, from the jump, this has nothing to do with Canaanites existing or not in the last days. So in a temple, where there were buyers and sellers of sheep and oxen and doves for sacrifice, such as our Lord drove out, but now there shall be no more of them, all the legal sacrifices being at an end. The word here used does signify a merchant and is so rendered in Hosea chapter 12, verse 7. Now, if you ever notice that the word trader is used in the ESV, the Hebraic Roots Bible, and also the KJ3 literal translation. Also, the word trafficker is used for the Jewish, publication Tanakh, right? Jewish Publication Society, the JPS. And also, the word merchant is actually used for the scriptures, which is another Hebrew Roots translation. Also, it's used for the Young's literal translation and also for the Novum Vulgate of the Latin Vulgate. It's used for that as well. So you'll notice that, yes, it's not talking about Canaanites here in this passage. One thing is that you have, it says, the actual Canaanites here had long since, right? And basically has the Gibeonites, the last remnant of them had been absorbed among the peoples of God. But all Israel were not. So you have Isaiah, for example, and this is one of my classical examples of showing can be called another nation, right? You have Isaiah called its princes and people rulers of Sodom, people of Gomorrah. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 10. And like I said, maybe I'll make a whole nother video on this if he requests me to do so, where this theme is rampant throughout the Old Testament. But why doesn't he say this? Because he doesn't study the scripture. What he does is he studies cultic precepts that are totally divorced from the paragraphs and bulliusly put together one single message, just like I'm doing now. Now, Ezekiel had said, quote, "Thus saith the Lord God unto Jerusalem." All he said, hold on, I'm sorry. He said, thy birth and now this is what thus saith the Lord to Jerusalem. I want to bring that home, okay? Thy birth and thy nativity is of the land of Canaan. Thy father was an Amorite and thy mother a Hittite. Why is he talking like this? He's talking to Jerusalem, right? Is God angry right now? Is he saying, it's as if you guys were never my kids? Why is he doing this? Now, or Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 3, right? You have Hosea use at least, the term of the twofold meaning Canaan, in whose hands are the balances of deceit. Balances has a lot to do with like merchants and selling, right? Notice that theme is still there, Hosea 12:7. And also you have in Zephaniah, all the people of Canaan are destroyed. Notice it said are destroyed, right? Zephaniah. Also, you have here, and that's Zephaniah 1:11. It says, after the time of the canon, Daniel is introduced by saying, "O thou seed of Canaan, and not of Judah." I wonder who he's talking to. If he's talking to Judah, if he's talking to the Israelites, well, now this gets even more interesting, doesn't it? Sounds like the theme that I've been saying that's in the Bible seems to keep on popping up. Why? Because I'm giving you scripture. I'm not giving you Hakka gorilla Hebrew Sicarri junk. That's let me go ahead and stop before I get crazy. Anyway, Ezekiel had spoken of ungodly priests, not only as uncircumcised in heart, but uncircumcised in flesh also. How on earth is he speaking to ungodly priests as uncircumcised in flesh? Well, man, he must be really angry, I guess. But why the distinction of circumcision of the flesh? I kind of thought that wasn't a big deal because Sicarri, these themes shouldn't be in the Bible as a big deal, but they are. Altogether alien from the people of God, Ezekiel 44:7, right? And by the way, this has a lot to do where it says, and there should be no more a traitor in the house of the Lord. In other words, all the bad people aren't going to be there anymore. This is the reason why I'm giving you these other that had this theme that says people aren't. Now, notice this. The speaks as Isaiah. It shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it. Oh, kind of like Zechariah 14:21. No bad people ain't going to be there anymore. How about Isaiah 35:8? And Joel, then shall Jerusalem be holy, and there shall no stranger pass through her anymore. Okay. How about this one? There shall in no wise enter it into anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination or a lie, without, or dogs, or sorcerers, and whoremongers, murderers, and whatsoever, and maketh a lie. Revelation 21 and 22:15. It's the same theme. So you could see that this has nothing to do with nations, but instead sinful people. Now I already know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, Matt, what about the New Testament? Because we do find, people writing about Canaanites in the New Testament. Are you sure about that? Let's find out. Now this comes from the Encyclopedia of Biblical, Theological, and ecclesiastical literature. It says this: the received text, which is the text where the KJV comes from, with Codex Sinaiticus, right? Codex A, with B and C and D. The designation, I cannot read today. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, designation of the apostle Simon, otherwise known as Simon Zelotes. It occurs in Matthew chapter 10 and Mark chapter 3. It does not signify a descendant of Canaan. that being in the Greek, both are in the Septuagint and the New Testament. It says in Matthew 15, verse 22, with Mark 7:26, nor does it signify, as has been suggested, a native of Cana, since that could not, that would probably be I think it says, I don't know how that speaks in the Greek, but it's a Greek word that I cannot pronounce. But it comes from the Hebrews, right? And it means zealous, or rather of the Chaldee. And also in the Syriac, you have Canaan, or yeah, Cananier. And it says, by which the Jewish sect or faction of the Zealots. So prominent in the last days of Jerusalem. So the Zealots were prominent in the last days of Jerusalem, not the Canaanites. All right, was designated. Now, you actually have this Syriac word is the reading of the Peshitta version. The Greek equivalent is zelotes, and this Luke 6:15 and Acts 1:3, because Acts was written by Luke, has correctly preserved. Matthew and Mark, on the other hand, have literally transferred the Syriac word as the Septuagint did frequently before them. There is no necessity to suppose, as Mr. Cruton does in his work of Nitrion, that they mistook the word for, Canaanite or Canaanite, a Canaanite, a descendant of Canaan. The evangelists could hardly commit such an error, whatever subsequent transcribes of their works may have done. But that this meaning, as afterward attached to the word, is plain from the readings of the Codex Bezae and the Vulgate. So that goes to show that this word here is talking about the zealots. It's not talking about literal descendants of Canaan. Therefore, Canaan no longer exists. Now, you also have, when it says here, he ended up making and I want everyone to pay attention to this part. This is a part where, I want y'all to pay attention to his logic, okay? Now, I listened to the video a few times and I kind of laughed. Basically, he was saying that the first thing he said was, well, look, Matt, it's already been proven to you that at that time when you got cut off about Genesis 17, that, Gorilla Hebrew had read about how the covenant was only for between God and Abraham and his seed after him forever for all his generations. It wasn't for anybody else. Then after that, they cut me off from reading the rest of the thing, which I'm going to do now. If you actually look at a video I did called Jesus and the Law of Moses, and also the New Covenant Explained, especially the New Covenant Explained, you'll see that when it came to the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, as in who it's for and who can be a part of it, you'll notice that that part of those two covenants are exactly the same. Let me show you. I'll show you with only Genesis 17, but not Jeremiah 31, because I don't want to make this video too long. It says this, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout your generations for an everlasting covenant. So he's going to make this covenant between God, Abraham, and his seed after him, right? And after that, it says to be God to you and your offspring after you. Okay, so now he's going to make sure that I'm going to be your God to your offspring and yourself, right? Now it says, I will give to you and your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. All right, amen to that. Now notice he said there, and God said to Abraham, as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring after you throughout your generations, right? Now, notice up there's talking about the covenant that's going to be between him, Abraham, and his seed after him. But he doesn't say what the covenant is yet. Just like in Jeremiah 31:31, where he said, listen, I'm going to make a covenant with Israel and Judah. So up to those 2 points, they're not saying what the covenant is yet. They're saying who they're going to make it with. Now, this is a part where the Sicarri had stopped. I'm going to show you why. Because when we start to talk about, okay, well, what is this covenant that you're going to make with me and my seed after me throughout all my generations? Well, here it is. Here it is. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you must be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male throughout your generations, whether born in your house or bought with your money from any foreigner who is not of your offspring. Both he who is born in your house and he who is bought with your money surely shall be circumcised. So shall my covenant be in your flesh, an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. So this goes to show that this covenant was for people who were born in his household, and also for people who were bought of money, who were basically foreigners who were not of his seed. This is consistent with Exodus chapter 12, which I thoroughly refuted during the debate. So you could see he makes a covenant between him, Abraham, and his seed after him, and he gets specific by saying, I'm going to establish my seed with Isaac and not Ishmael, which is a whole nother story. But yet, what is the contents of the deal? The deal is whoever wants to be a part of my people has to be circumcised, whether they're from your seed or whether they're not from your seed and they're like some stranger. There it goes. What about Jesus in the new covenant? Same thing. Jesus said, hey, this is the new covenant in my blood. That's in Luke 22. He ended up saying, I give my body as food for the life of the world. So he's doing something with his body for the world. And also, when it comes to his blood, he says a new covenant is in his blood. And he also does something for the world with his blood, which includes the world into that covenant. That's the reason why people can be saved. They can enter the new covenant. They can be in Christ. They can be a part of the new covenant. That's why Ephesians chapter 2 exists. It says that even though you were far off, you have been brought near by the blood of Christ. That's talking about actual Gentiles. Gentiles in the flesh. You look that up and it says, natural born Gentiles in the Greek. You can't get past that. That's as Gentiles you can get. So, hold on just a second. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm back. Anyway. Yeah, so that's as Gentiles you can get. So now you see that when it comes to the covenants, it's made with a certain amount of people or whatever. In this case, in the new covenant, it's Christ. And yet it has this universal offer that's consistent with Old and New Testament. But he doesn't want to show you all this because they like to skip over this stuff because they don't like to give full answers, let alone answer questions. Now, the second thing I wanted to say was he tried to say, well, Matt, I think it's foolish that you think that people can, let me see, that people can actually become Israelites, Jews, Hebrews, or whatever by circumcision. And he said, I think it's foolish that you use Genesis 34. The reason was because he noticed that Jacob had did it deceitfully. And then after that, he said something that made me laugh. He said, this is a part that you left out because look, it says he did it deceitfully. You left that out. Let's leave that out. All about the reason why is because it had absolutely nothing to do with the point I was trying to prove. What he's trying to conclude is he's basically saying, well, look, man, if circumcision makes you an Israelite, then this passage would not exist. That doesn't actually make sense. Here, passage to show you doesn't make sense. Ask for me as right, yeah. Ask for me as great bread price and gift as you will, and I will give you whatever you say to me. only give me the young woman to be my wife. The son answered Shechem and his father had defiled to give uncircumcised. Interesting. For that disgrace to us. Only on this condition with you as we are. Wow. They could become as he is. That's a real definition there. And that definition is consistent with Genesis 17. I'll show you in a bit. By every male among you being circumcised. Oh, so you could become as we are by being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and you will take our daughters and unto ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. So, in other words, that is the definition. Look, and it says, "But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter, and we will be gone." So, notice the definition or the implication of what happens after you're circumcised is that you will become one people. Now, he wasn't kidding about that. He wasn't being deceitful about the definition of circumcision because it's consistent with what God says about circumcision. He says, if you don't end up circumcising the people, then they will be cut off from my people. In other words, they're not going to be part of my people because they've broken my covenant. So you're not going to be part of it. That's why Exodus 4, Moses is almost killed by God because he did not circumcise his son. Starting in verse 21, you'll see it himself. His wife, Zipporah, circumcises his son. And after that, God ends up, not chasing after Moses to kill him anymore. Do you think God was kidding? Do you think he was being deceitful? No. So this is a definition. He was being deceitful about what he was going to do after him being circumcised. Hence, he's going to be weak and sore. And that is the context of his deceit, not the meaning of circumcision itself. Hence, that's the reason why he ended up saying what would happen after you're being circumcised. And he said, look, you know what? You need to be as we are. And he used circumcision as the context of what he means. That's consistent with Genesis 17. Why? Because that's where he got it from. He got it from Abraham, his ancestor. His logic literally does not add up. He misplaces it. The deceit is not within the definition of what circumcision is. It's what he's going to do after. Unless you want to say his deceit changes the meaning of circumcision. See, Matt, because he's doing it deceitfully, this means, Matt, this circumcision doesn't make you an Israelite. Oh, really? So I guess, I guess obviously he's lying about the meaning here. And also, I guess God is lying as well. Or maybe, somebody's lying. Or maybe he's saying that God wasn't right as to what circumcision does and what it means and what it gets you according to Genesis 17 and of course Exodus chapter 12. Do you see how his logic doesn't line up? Let's continue because I don't want to be here all day. Besides, I'm about to go out to eat. Edom wasn't in Jerusalem during the Babylonian captivity. I could go ahead and prove this. Basically, he went to 3 verses. I'll go ahead and read them. Because you said these 2 nations and these 2 countries shall be mine, and we shall take possession of them, although the Lord was there. I bet he was, to make sure that, that wouldn't happen. Thus said the Lord God, because the enemy of you, the ancient heights. We're going to talk about those ancient heights in a bit. I chose to leave the commentary out of it. I'll just tell it to you by the top of the head. Have become our possession. Now, when you look up what the term ancient heights actually means, it means the place or the mountains of Negev. And of course, Edomites love mountains, hence Mount Seir. Now, I'll show you where Negev actually is, where they really wanted to go ahead and, have their place to be. Now it says, now I think either this is talking about the Ammonites or the Amorites, the Ammonites or the Edomites. I'll have to check the verse again. Then after this says, therefore thus saith the Lord God, surely I have spoken in my hot jealousy against the rest of the nations and against all Edom, who gave my land to themselves as a possession with wholehearted joy and utter contempt, that they might make its pastures a prey. They're going to spoil the place. This goes consistent with what I've been saying before in my last video. They ended up having it as a possession to spoil it, to take everything, not to stay there. Now, notice this. Ezekiel 36. Now, this is the commentary from Clark. He says, because the enemy said the Idumeans thought they would shortly be put in possession of the strong places of Israel. Strong places kind of sounds like the ancient heights, doesn't it? We'll get to that in a second. The ancient high places shall be yours. The ancient high places. Right. So that goes into Negev, the Mount Negev, not Jerusalem itself. This is what they were after. But yeah, they were calling it, the Jerusalem, right? Now, if you notice here, look at Negev. Negev is actually in the southern area. And when it comes to Jerusalem, it's way up there. So I guess when it comes to Negev, you got a lot of mountains, and that's your place of protection, looking down on the place that you just got done spoiling. Now, also, it says here in a lot of other commentaries that this is a description of Nebuchadnezzar's marching with his army against Idumea, whom the prophet compares to a lion coming out of his den near Jordan. This is talking about Jeremiah 49. Now, this totally flatlines Hakaz's, supposed saying, oh, they possess the land and all that. Well, guess what? Here comes Nebuchadnezzar. So that's not good. It says Nebuchadnezzar is he or whom it is foretold that there shall come like a lion with fierceness and fury, like a lion enlarged by the swelling of Jordan, overflowing his banks, which forces him out of his covert by the waterside into the higher grounds. Now, you go to K&D commentary. It says this judgment will immediately take place. The nations whom are to make Edom small and despise have already been summoned by the Lord to war. Jeremiah has taken this idea from Obadiah. Isn't that something? The subject where it says, I have heard, is a prophet who has heard the information from Yahweh. In Obadiah is found the plural, we have heard, because the prophet includes himself among the people. Now notice also, the whole surmise goes like this. One purpose of these prophecies was to assure that the Hebrews, at the time they were taken captive to Babylon in 586 BC, that Jehovah would not allow the covetous Edomites to occupy their land. God promised that the land of Judah would remain vacant and that the nation of Israel would be restored on that land after 70 years. And you can look at these three verses, Jeremiah 25, 29, and Daniel. Now, there's two others that I didn't include, and it was actually in Jeremiah 27 and 28, where he says he put a yoke of iron around the necks of all these nations. Guess who was among them? Edom. You can read Jeremiah 27 and 28 for yourself. So this confirms that the Edomites went into captivity shortly after the look at Daniel, first year of his reign. I, Daniel, perceived that the books of the number of the years, that according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, must pass before the end of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. Jeremiah 25:11. This whole land shall become a ruin and a waste, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Now that's in Jeremiah 25. When you go to Jeremiah 27 and 28, it names those nations. Guess who's among them? Edom is. Jeremiah 29. For thus saith the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. Adam Clark's commentary, Matthew Henry, and Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown, all these see the prophecies against Edom as being fulfilled partially by an invasion by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar in the 6th century BC and partially by the Maccabees. Jeremiah 25:21 specifically predicts the humbling of Edom by Babylon, the same power that conquered Jerusalem 5 years before the destruction of Edom. History confirms this. Now, this actually comes from oh man, I forget where it was from. It was what I just read earlier. It came from I think Thomas Williamson, who is an avid historian, studier of the word. He is the one that made those conclusions based on those scriptures I just read in the last slide. Now, this comes from livius.org, just to show you exactly what happened, how it pulls certain sources, whether it's from Ezra, whether it's from the Nabonidus Chronicle, whether it's from Flavius Josephus. And it says, when the Assyrians had been superseded by the Babylonians as leaders of the Near East in the last quarter of the 7th century, things started to change. Judah was the first to be converted into a province. King Nebuchadnezzar did this in 587 and deported the Jews to Babylonia. In the 5th year, Ammon and Moab were annexed. That came from Josephus. And it seems that during the Babylonian captivity of the Jews, which is traditionally dated from 587 to 539, the Edomites looted Judah and settled in the northern Negev. Did not just get done saying that Negev is the place where they parked themselves. And after that, it quotes a bunch of scriptures. And it says, maybe as a retaliation, Edom was invaded by the Babylonian king Nabonidus in 553. So look at that. So now you have Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus. Also, back to Jeremiah 49. It says concerning Edom, and you have all these other scriptures. It says this prophecy is closely related to Obadiah. These people descended from Esau and lived south of the Dead Sea. Perpetual desolation is ahead for Edom. God will make it bare. The destroyer is probably Babylon. There it is. 588 to 586. Ain't that something? Or 552 to 581. As verse 19 has descriptions used of Babylon against Judah. Flooding of the Jordan and also flying as the eagle is used of Babylon. And it quotes Habakkuk. That comes from BibleStudies.org. Those scriptures are consistent. Those timelines are sharp. And that's basically what the story is. That's the consistent tale. Otherwise, you're going to call Jeremiah a liar when he says, look, I put a yoke of iron on all these nations. That's what God said through Jeremiah. Go to Jeremiah 27 and 28, and it confirms Jeremiah 25, which I got done reading earlier. Now let's go to Obadiah. He ended up asking a question. He said, you know what, Matt? I don't think that the house of Joseph was around because, they were all scattered and, they were, they were divorced from Israel and Israel wasn't one yet. And so, Matt, I don't think this came to pass. Matt, where has this come to pass? A house of Joseph will be aflame. I don't understand that, Matt. When did that come to pass? Because, Matt, all I understand is that I see the Northern Kingdom divorce, and I don't remember them coming back to power. Well, Deacon Akai, you haven't studied enough. If you actually look up that word flame, it means, well, the first is obviously flame, but then the second meaning, which is the only other meaning, means tip of weapon, point, head of spear. And I'm going to break that down to you on the next slide. But I want you to remember that because this is what the house of Joseph is being described as. A flaming sword. Now, it's funny because I looked at the word fire for the house of Jacob. And yes, obviously it means fire, right? But then all the other definitions underneath that, it says, oh, it's a fire of the Lord. It's a fire of judgment. It's a fire of this. Now, in the context of how Jacob is being described, yeah, that is judgment, especially what they're doing to Edom. So, yeah, that's a judgment. And here's a flame. The flame is a sword. So you got the fire of judgment and a sword of judgment here. Israel and Judah are used interchangeably in the Old Testament and New Testament, signifying a union among the division that grew into unity beginning after the times of the Babylonian exile. So in other words, it kind of grew from there. And I guess by the time of the Maccabees, it was full-fledged. See my Pure Myths video on who are the lost, or who on are the tribes lost, and no, they're not. Now, of course, here it says Israel, again, united and unassailed, shall execute judgment upon others. A fire. Psalm speaks of, Jacob and Joseph. Ain't that something? Psalm 77 speaks of Jacob and Joseph. I repeat, Psalm 77 speaks of Jacob and Joseph. About the subject of Daniel 7:28, proving the returned exiles had northern tribes among their return. How many of them were there by then? I'm not sure. Well, I'm sure, a nice little portion. But by the time the Maccabees came, they became full-fledged. Now, though in the preceding verse, the house of Jacob would seem to embrace all the restored Israel without any distinction of the two kingdoms, in this verse, being opposed to the house of Joseph, it requires to be taken as synonymous as 3. Hearken unto me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel. Why are you going to call people that aren't in front of you? It doesn't make sense. They're there. Finally, it says, you know what, Matt? I also don't see. And by the way, I'm gonna get back to. I'm gonna get back to this. Don't worry. I'm not done with that. Then he says, you know what, Matt? When did the Jews possess all the nations and all the heathen and things like that? Once again, this man does not understand Jewish idioms. He does not understand that the prophets write in poetic form. He doesn't understand hyperbolicness, hyperbole. He doesn't understand any of that. And so it's sad that, he literally, the best he has is taking everything at face value. He does not use other deeper layers, which I've been showing this whole time. Now, during the time of the Maccabees, the Jews not only conquered Edom, but freed themselves from the Greeks, and in addition, conquered the Philistines, as mentioned in 1 Maccabees chapter 5. The Ishmaelites, Ammonites, Moabites, and other neighboring nations were in the beginning worshippers of the true God, as being descendants of Abraham, Lot, etc., with whom the knowledge of the true God was preserved. And the Jews subdued a considerable part of these nations in the times of the Maccabees. But this is also a prophecy of setting up the kingdom of the Messiah and the bringing in of the Gentiles. End up saying that. Why is it that he's looking at this prophecy as both nationalistically and historically fulfilled, and also he's looking at it as a spiritual fulfillment? The same reason that James did in Acts 15. Sometimes there are dual fulfillments, historical and spiritual. Now look at this. Let's go to Maccabees and compare it to Obadiah, and this is what we find. This is Maccabees. It says, wherefore they brought to destroy the generation of Jacob that was among them, and thereupon they began to slay and destroy the people. Then Judas fought against the children of Esau in Edom at Akrabatini. He sieged Israel, and he gave them a great overthrow, and took them also. He remembered the injury of the children of Bain, who had been a snare and an offense to the people, in that they lay in wait for them in the ways. He shut them up, therefore, in the towers, and encamped against them, and destroyed them, right? He destroyed them utterly, and burned the towers of that place with fire, and all that there were in. Wow, he burned the place with fire, huh? Wait a minute. Now, what did the other part say in verse 18 there? And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, right? Signifying judgment, the fire of someone's judgment. And the house of Joseph a flame, signifying the tip of a point of a spear. Yeah, that's some judgment. They were consumed by the fire of Jacob, and they were slain by the sword of Joseph. How about verse 28? Hereupon Judas and his host turned suddenly by the way of the wilderness unto Basra, and when he had won the city, he slew all the males at the edge of the sword, and took all their spoils, and burned the city with fire. Once again, what is Obadiah 1:18? And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, right? A fire of judgment. And the house of Joseph a flame. and the house of Esau for stubble. Why are they going to be? It says, and they. Who's the they? The they is the house of Jacob and the house of Joseph. Shall kindle in them. Now, who is the them? Now, maybe I did this in reverse, so let me do this again. The they is Edom. Shall kindle. Who are they going to kindle or burn inside of? The house of Jacob, which is a fire of judgment. They're going to kindle in them. In the house of Joseph, a flame, a flaming sword. They're going to kindle in them and devour them. Now, I guess a house of, the Joseph of flame, that's part where the devourer takes there, right? And there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for the Lord hath spoken it. Finally, you go to verse 65. I'll read the yellow because I don't want to be here all night. And pull down the fortresses of it, and burn the towers thereof round about. From thence he moved to the land of the Philistines. Now, this is a part where it says what? Possess the remnant of Edom and all the heathen and all the nation. Do you know, I was looking at other commentaries and it was saying that, all the heathens or all the nations, they said that that's just a catchword for all the other nations, like whether it's Amorites and Horonites or whatever. It also says the land of Philistines and passed through Samaria. Also, Judas turned to Azotus in the land of the Philistines, and when he had pulled down their altars and burned their carved images with fire, and spoiled their cities, he returned into the land of Judah. Now look at verse 36. From thence went he and took Kospho, Maked, Bazor, and the other places in the country of Gilead. Wow, ain't that something? And what does verse 19 say? And they of the south shall possess the mount of Esau, and they of the plain of the Philistines, and they shall possess the fields of Ephraim. Wow, so it looks like they're going to get their place back. And the fields of Samaria. Oh, they already did that after they passed through Philistine. It says they passed through Samaria. Look at that. Obadiah is sharp. He's right on point, according to 1 Maccabees chapter 5. And Benjamin shall possess Gilead. Now, something tells me, if I decide to look up, who took Kospho, Makkah, and Bazor, and all the other places of the country of Gilead, I wouldn't be surprised if that person that took the country was a Benjamite. I wouldn't be surprised. So for him to say that Obadiah is not fulfilled is totally atrocious. I just showed you that it is. Let's go to Acts 15, because Acts 15 actually takes another stab at this. Notice it says, except ye must be circumcised after the manner of Moses, you can't be saved. Verse 9, and put no difference between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith. So circumcision was the difference maker between the us and the them. But according to Sicarri, according to Hakah, circumcision really isn't that much of a difference. But yet this is the theme in the scriptures. Also, now this is from my program, the Lex versus KJV. Obviously, we know that the Lex is the Old Testament Septuagint, and the Masoretic KJV is the Hebrew Masoretic Old Testament. Notice the difference there. Notice that in the Old Testament, where it has the Lex, the Septuagint, the word is Adam, but for the Hebrew Masoretic, which came in 900 AD, the word is Edom. It's a play on words. Sounds like sounds like these words are kind of playing on each other, right? Now notice this. James quotes the Septuagint. He could have quoted the Hebrew Masoretic, I guess, even though it was around 900 AD, which means I don't know what kind of Hebrew he would quote, which is far more reason why he ended up quoting the 200 BC Septuagint. And in the midst of Acts 15, which is a big council about what are we going to do with these Gentiles, he uses the Septuagint. And it says, look, that the residue of men of Adam might seek after the Lord, and all the Gentiles, and all the nations, right? upon whom my name is called. Notice that he's actually taking this verse and saying, look, the Gentiles are coming to Jesus in a place that's called the church. He said, I will build it again. He said, after this, I will return and I will build again the tabernacle of David, which is fallen down. And I will build it again in the ruins thereof, and I will set it up. What did Jesus say about his body? He said, you know what? Destroy this temple, and I will raise it up again in 3 days. And in the text, it says, though the Jews did not realize that Jesus was talking about his body, he wasn't talking about the temple. So when the Gentiles are going to go ahead and come to Jesus, they're going to come to the tabernacle of David. Jesus is that tabernacle of David that has been fallen down and has risen up again in 3 days. That's the reason why he quotes it, because these Gentiles are coming to Jesus. And the prophecy here is talking about and being applied to Jesus. And when it comes to the residue of men, not talking about Edomites, James ends up using them and just saying, oh, I see the Gentiles coming to Jesus in Amos chapter 9, verse 12. Even though it has a nationalistic and historical fulfillment, they see a spiritual fulfillment. You could thank Jesus for that. That's what that means. So my question to you, Haka, what does this mean to you? Am I wrong about these scriptures? If so, can you please answer that? Can you show me what's wrong with what I just did? Oh, that's right, but he doesn't answer questions. Now look at this. It says here in Numbers, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but do not fear. But not fear. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab and break down all the sons of Sheth. I want to go ahead and read 2 Samuel. This is what it says. It says this. After this, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them, and David took Methegma out of the hand of the Philistines, and he defeated Moab, and he measured them with a line. Notice, he defeated Moab, but he did something interesting. He measured them with a line. Do you know where it says it crushes the forehead of Moab? Do you know in other translations, and when you break down the Hebrew, it literally means from one end of Moab to the other, as if you're trying to measure something? Isn't that interesting? I decided to leave all those notes out because I thought to myself, I said, you know what? These people need to look this stuff up for themselves. So you go ahead, don't take my word for it. You look up what the forehead of Moab means. If it means something that you have to measure, if it's a distance from something. If it is, then look at how David defeated the Moabites and what he did afterwards. He measured them with a line, making them lie down on the ground. 2 lines he measured to be put to death, and 1 full line to be spared. And the Moabites became servants to David and brought tribute. So, there are no Moabites today, but there are still sinners who carry their sinful characteristics, hence spiritualized prophecies. This is the reason why you have all kind of apostles doing this stuff. So Hakan doesn't realize that he accepts spiritualized prophecies taught by Jesus and the apostles that have been historically fulfilled. Why is he blind to this? The same reason Paul says the non-messianic Jews are in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Now, finally, for the last one, the easiest of all. First off, notice that Ezra here, this is a prayer, okay? Oh, you know, I think there's one question that I forgot that he asked. He said, how does a married couple become Israelites, right? Because obviously there's nowhere in Scripture where it has any way of them becoming Israelites. Well, when you actually look at the man who becomes an Israelite by circumcision, and all of a sudden his wife is joined to him. Well, you have to keep the laws of Moses in order to remain within the covenant. If not, then you will be cut off from your people. You know, there's all kinds of passages that speak about if you do certain things, you'll be cut off. Just like in Genesis 17. If you're not circumcised, then you're cut off from the people. You're not even in the covenant. Nope, cut off. Now, for the woman who has married this man who has become a Jew, If she decides to keep the laws of Moses along with him, then she is a Jew as well. This is the reason why, for example, let's see, I believe it was, I think it was, oh no 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 no. Me and Hakai had a talk, and he showed me something that I have yet to confirm for myself. I used Ruth as an example, Ruth the Moabite, and said, "Look, hey, she married Boaz, and so she's a part of David's line and things like that." And of course, you got you have I think it was who was it? She was the Canaanite harlot who helped them escape. She's actually named as part of the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11. So these people, they actually became Jews because of who they married, and I believe she married Solomon. Um, so that's one way of looking at it. But he actually said, well, you can't use that. And I forget why. So I'm going to go ahead and study that. But yeah, that's as much as I could say. And also, here's another thing. In Acts chapter 16, you have Timothy's mother being called a Jewess, but yet her husband was a Greek. But yet she's still called a Jewess. How and why is that? Perhaps because she's keeping the law of Moses, and perhaps because, she was perhaps born to Jewish parents and she grew up keeping the laws of Moses. So when it comes to somebody who marries someone who is circumcised and keeps the law of Moses, there is no reason to think that that person, that woman who ends up keeping the law of Moses with her circumcised husband who keeps the law of Moses, is not an Israelite now. It doesn't make sense. He'll have to demonstrate why that would not be according to everything that we know in Scripture and make it consistent. Hopefully, he'll do that. But he'll probably won't respond to any of this because they don't answer questions. Anyway, so Ezra chapter 9. Now look at this. Notice, for one, this is a prayer. Also, you're going to notice that he actually, even though Ezra is repentant and he's doing the right thing, because Israel is still, doing the wrong thing, he throws himself in there with them. This is consistent as to how the other Jews who never came back from the Babylonian captivity, but they decided to stay in all those lands. That goes to show that even though that they are free in Judea, right, in Jerusalem, they have free autonomy to have governors, to rebuild their temple, to practice their religion, right? All this stuff. But yet, he's still saying that, you know what? We're still bondmen. Why is that? Not because of, the Persians are punishing us or doing bad to us. No. Notice he lays all the reasoning with the sins of the people and also the captivities that happen abroad and that are still going on because of the people who haven't returned yet. That's the reason why he's saying, you know what? If they're not free, then neither are we. That's what he's saying. But even then, when he says that, he makes a distinction between the conditions of how Jerusalem is doing and how the rest of the lands are doing. So with that, let me go ahead and read and prove everything to you what I'm saying. Oh my God, I am ashamed and blush to lift my face to you. Now, of course, this has a lot to do with what? Himself? No. It has a lot to do with the people. He's being obedient. He says, my God, for our iniquities have risen higher than our heads, and our guilt has mounted up to the heavens. Now, all of a sudden, he's going to go back down to memory lane. From the days of our fathers to this day, we have been seen in great guilt, right? We have been in great guilt. And for our iniquities, he says, our kings and our priests have been given into the hands of the kings, that's plural, of the lands, that's plural. I guess you could start with Egyptian captivity and Assyrian captivity, Babylonian captivity. They just got out of that. And look, even though they're under a king right now, this guy isn't so bad because he set us free and he allowed us to have Jewish governors and he allowed us to rebuild our temple and he allowed us to practice our religion for free. Also, it says the kings of the lands. So notice, this is talking about outside of Jerusalem. Because look, Jerusalem is not lands, it's land. That's singular. He's talking about plural. He's talking about the Jerusalem. He's talking about the Israelites that are scattered abroad. To the sword, to captivity, to plundering, and to utter shame. Now, where is this shame at? This shame is with the kings of the lands, as it is to this day. Do you see that? Now look at this. He's going to make a distinction between everything that's going on outside of Jerusalem to everything that's going on inside of Jerusalem. Listen to what he says. He says, but now for a brief moment, favor has been shown by the Lord our God to leave us a remnant and to give us a secure hold within his holy place. Where is that at? That's in Jerusalem, where they're at right now. Unlike the kings of the lands and everything else, right? That our God may brighten our eyes and grant us a little reviving in our slavery. Now notice this slavery. He's saying, you know what? If they're not free, because they're in captivity and of the kings of the lands and the plundering all, if they're not free, then neither are we. Give us a little reviving in our overall slavery as we count ourselves as a collective. For we are slaves. Now, you know what's funny in the video? He steps off his King James onlyism because when you look it up in the King James, the word were, it's slanted. It says, for we were slaves. Ain't that something? Because he must have learned something that what I did in the last video when I end up refuting Guerrilla Hebrew in under 10 minutes. That video, check it out. I showed that every time that the words are italicized and slanted in the Hebrew, it means that those words are not there in the original text. So what it says, we were slaves, he doesn't like that because that you know, it once again, it confirms what I've been saying, right? Now, when you do look in the Septuagint, 200 BC Septuagint, it does say for we are slaves. But once again, that goes back to the whole. If they're not free, then neither are we. If they're slaves, then so are we. That's what he's talking about. When it says, look, the hand given into the hand of the kings of the lands. He's chronicling everything. But he's making a distinction between their condition. But he's saying, even though our condition is free and we have a little secure hold in this holy place and we got grace, he says, you know what? We're still enslaved because we got everybody else that's in the kings of the lands who with the sword and the captivity and plundering unto this very moment. So while we're sitting here safe in Jerusalem, everybody else, you know, outside of Jerusalem is being slaughtered. We're still not free as a whole. That's what he's saying. Look, he makes another distinction. Yet our God has not for slavery. Now this, because he's going to use himself as an example. He said, look, we're not all slaves. Check us out. But has extended to us his steadfast love before the kings of Persia, to grant us some reviving, to set us up the house of our God, to repair its ruins, and to give us protection in Judea and Jerusalem. So these kings here in Persia, they're giving Jerusalem protection. Jerusalem and Judea, they're giving protection. That's a distinction between everybody else who didn't come back. That's why he said only a remnant returned. Just as the prophecy said, only a remnant will return. They decided to stay there in their captivity. That is the prayer of Ezra. But yet, he doesn't do any kind of exegesis of any passage because it just totally goes against his narrative of him pining for Isaiah 14 not to be fulfilled. Well, I got news for you. It's been fulfilled. And also notice that this is the only part that he attacked about me showing how Isaiah 14 was fulfilled in my last video. And why? Because it goes to show that he has nothing else to attack. This is the last part. I don't know what else he's gonna do with that. Well, I actually do know another, but anyway, I'll be ready for that too. So finally, it says here, um, I'll just read the one on the right. It says, here Ezra speaks of the misery abroad, remembering only a remnant will return from exile, while the rest chose to stay in Babylon and abroad. In other words, Ezra, if some are still not free, then neither is Jerusalem as a whole. Yet he puts distinctions between the remnant exiles who return to Jerusalem, being under grace, and the kings and captivities of the lands being plural. He does the same with his prayer. Though himself being repentant, he counts himself a sinner due to the rest of the rest of Israel. Pattern in his prayer confirms that the bondage he speaks of is abroad and is not the same as the local being accompanied with religious freedom and governmental autonomy. Oh, and I almost forgot. Protection in Judea and Jerusalem because of the steadfast love before the kings of Persia, right? Also, it says this, but yet, being returned to their own land, it was a life from the dead from them, even though into some degree of bondage, being in subjection and tributaries to the kings of Persia. So, in other words, the only kind of thing that any historian can find as the reason why he could possibly say that they're in bondage is because he's got to give tribute to the kings of Persia. But notice what happened in Nehemiah. Even though they were given that tribute, what did the king do? He financed the building of the temple. Well, where did he get that money from? He got it from all the other places that he gets money and taxes from the kingdom, including Judea. So this guy gets money and does good stuff with it. But that's the closest that people can have for a subjection of bondage. But yet, look at the steadfast love before the kings of Persia. So they're, even though they're giving like yearly rent money, they're still going ahead and using that money to make sure that everything's okay. That does not sound like captivity to me. Last slide. Why don't take a Ka, Gorilla Hebrew, and the Sicarri seriously? 1. Lying about the character of a person when failing to prove your beliefs from Scripture. So basically, what he does is, so because I keep on like disproving him in all of his videos, basically he tries to attack my character. But the problem is that he's actually lying. Do you ever notice that one, he's using the Adolf Hitler ploy? If you believe a lie, if you keep on saying a lie enough, then the people will believe it. So notice that throughout the video, he kept on saying over and over and over, "Yep, Matt, he's effeminate, but don't worry, that's his preference. I'm not knocking him." Notice he never said, Matt said that was his preference. Did you ever notice he never said that? Why? Because I actually never said that was my preference. Never said it, never typed it. So the reason why he can't find anything about it is because there's nothing about it. Because I'm straight. I want to be a husband and a father someday. Like that's me. I'm a family man. You know what I mean? Um, so so he tries to say, well, he's effeminate, but yet, like, notice he just keeps saying it, but he's not going to provide any kind of quotes of me saying that I was. And instead, he keeps on finding the opposite things like, well, I'm straight. I like women and things like that. So I don't know. I just thought I'd throw that in there. But why do they do this? Because once again, this is their way of distracting you from the truth. The truth is that they're being paralyzed in their their refutations, right? Our refutations. And so what do? You have to distract the people from seeing that you're not answering anything and you don't have anything to answer. So you have to discredit the person. It's an old, cultic tactic, and they know these things. Two, avoiding questions you cannot and will not answer, despite me making a questions video for you days before you made one for me, simply because I made one for you to answer. Notice, yeah, I ended up making him a video, right? And I had all these questions. Went in his inbox, asked him all these questions. Did he answer the question? No, he didn't. Also, same thing with I think it was some guy named Yatab. Asked him the same thing. Dodge the questions. They won't answer questions. So what happens? Days later, they make a video full of questions saying that I'm not going to answer any questions. Simply because I've made a video with a bunch of questions that you have not answered. Now it just gets worse because now, according to this whole video, I've answered every single one of your questions in great detail. And guess what? You still haven't answered any of my questions. So, three, you derive your theology from victim and vengeance mentality and not the Bible. There were plenty more reasons, but this is a good place to stop. Finished. Now answer my questions. Oh, right. They will not and cannot answer my questions.